Welcome, my friend, to Next Level Change Success, a change conversation for leaders, project and change practitioners for today and tomorrow. My name is Therese Perez of myvirtualchangemanager.com, and I'm an experienced change and project professional and people leader with many years of experience in the industry. I love business, and I love the people side of business especially. So nothing lights me up more than seeing people use change management, project management, and strong change leadership to engage, motivate, and inspire people, and ultimately transform organisations. If you've heard about change management and have no idea of what it involves, then you're in the right place. If you know about change management, but you want to take your practices to the next level, then this is where you should be. I'm going to share the stories of my experiences, interview some fantastic people, and I'm going to explore all of the challenges and opportunities that you face in organisations right now. So please join me and let's go and have some fun. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode, Season 2, Episode 4. Today we are talking about leadership in the Change Diamond of Program Effectiveness, and it's a hot topic this year. Before I begin though, I'd like to acknowledge that I am recording on Dharawal land and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which I am recording, elders both past, present and emerging. So let's just cover off leadership. It is really a hot topic in 2023, and I suspect that even when you're listening to this podcast and even in future, even though I say 2023, I feel like it's always going to be a hot topic around leadership capability. But I want to qualify, I guess, that we are talking about this in the context of programs. So what role does leadership play in achieving outcomes? So in the previous podcast episodes, I've talked about the other points of the diamond. So I've talked about the design element, which often isn't talked about, which is so key to achieving outcomes, ensuring that you're engaging with those who are impacted by the change or the users of the service, product, process, policy in its design will always achieve a better outcome than if you simply do it from a desktop or do it with those internally in the business who essentially feel like they're experts. So that's one element of design. Then we covered off the yin and the yang, project management, change management, how those two disciplines dance together when it comes to programs, and very much around that resourcing element. What is the right resourcing mix? And we've also written about that at myvirtualchangemanager.com. So if you're looking into resourcing for a program, I suggest you jump onto the website and have a look at that blog article, because I really did explore some of the key aspects of that. And then we look at leadership and the need for good, effective leadership on a program. There is a lot of discussion around change sponsorship, and really change sponsorship is something that should be considered around this middle management leadership aspect. But when you're looking at the sponsor of a program as such, maybe the person who is sponsoring financially the program, they need to connect in at all levels with both their peer group, but also into that middle management level to ensure that the outcome is going to be achieved. That is the role of any leader who is essentially financing or funding the program. When it comes to change sponsorship, though, it's important that the change sponsors are those who are closest to the action. They're closest to the group who are getting impacted. And it is really important that the change sponsors in that fashion are engaged and leading effectively. But I did want to talk a little bit about the program sponsor and leadership and the role that they take, because it really does affect the outcome. And there's a couple of ways in which the leader will behave, which will determine whether those outcomes are going to be achieved. One is asking the right questions. Oftentimes, and I do feel for leaders, I myself am a leader and have been in many of my roles, and it's not an easy gig. I think the leaders get criticised pretty far and wide and pretty easily, often by those in programs, But the reality is that it's not an easy gig, and you want to make sure that you have all of the enablers in place when it comes to decision making. You need to provide facts, you need to provide evidence, you need to provide options so that that leader can question, interrogate, and then make what they believe to be the best decision at the time. That's really important. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's certain issues that are raised, half-baked, not fully thought through, and decisions are made half-baked and not fully thought through, and that really does impact the outcome of the program. The other thing that the leader is really on the hook for is making sure that they're engaging their peer group and ensuring that at the level, so typically this is, general manager level or above, that the peers are aware of what is happening, that they're aware of the impacts, and that they raise any issues or concerns. And sometimes that doesn't happen, but it is important to be explicit with that leader that that is a requirement, that is part of their role. Consider that the concept of ensuring that there's more than just, say, the program sponsor, the person who's funding the program, on board about the change or the program itself. All of that level, regardless of what level it's being funded at, all of that level of leadership need to be across what is happening with the program, and also be discussing any impacts and engaged in its outcome, especially if it's a transformation piece. That is one of the key roles of the leader, as well as making sure that the change program supporting the piece of work is adequate, making sure that there is enough messaging, enough awareness, enough delivery, enough momentum happening. And it is part of, the challenge is to ensure that any strategic impediment to the program is raised and dealt with, and the risks are managed well. That is also the role of the leader. Now, if I think about leadership currently, and I think this oftentimes when I've gone into organisations, is that there's almost this moment of overwhelm for many leaders if they're not used to sponsoring a piece of work. They don't know their role, they're unsure of it, and they don't really want to ask about it. But they might feel a little bit overwhelmed if they've never experienced the program environment before. And there are a couple of things that you can do insofar as onboarding leaders, which can happen in programs who may not have ever played that role before. And if you have, a bit of the luxury of having a PMO, a program management office or a project management office in your organisation, this is a function that PMO should actually fulfill, which is to brief the leader and onboard them into the program if they've never led or sponsored a piece of work before. And oftentimes, if this doesn't happen, then really the leader is depending solely on the project manager and the change manager to deliver that piece for them. And they are hands off, and they almost abdicate their accountability or responsibility to those individuals, which is a big no-no. So important that leaders are actually onboarded and clearly articulated their, ideal responsibilities. Engagement is really important around how they like to be communicated to, how frequently. There's almost a terms of reference around that with the leader on how they like to be engaged, and also what the project or program needs from the leader insofar as communicating more broadly across the organisation. But then always remember, from a change perspective, as I mentioned before, change sponsorship is a different thing altogether, which can get confused. So sometimes people think change sponsorship is the person financing the piece of work. No, it's not. Change sponsorship is about those who are closest to the impacted groups, that they're engaged, that leadership cohort is engaged, and they are comfortably ambassadors for the program and what the program is delivering, and well engaged and well communicated to and well enabled. So a couple of things there to consider about the role of the leader and making sure that they're enabled, and also that empathetic approach around many leaders have been promoted or in their roles because of their background and subject matter expertise, not necessarily their ability to manage projects or sponsor projects or having even experienced projects before. You can never make that assumption. So with leaders and looking at capability, this is one area that many organisations are starting to realise, is that leaders need to fundamentally have some capability around program sponsorship, decision making, strategic thinking, and connecting dots. I do always talk about this concept of connecting dots, and a lot of the time it's a way of thinking, a way of understanding impact, which helps leaders ask the right questions. Who's going to be impacted by this change? How big is the impact? How many different aspects are going to change as a result of this? And have we resourced this adequately? There's this piece of work happening in this other department. How's that going to link through to this? Are we duplicating effort? Are we double counting benefits? Those type of questions are things that leaders who've been in projects or programs before, they're the questions that they ask, because they're the realities that can happen, especially in larger organisations where pieces of work can spin up, and a collaborative leader who is on the ball around sponsoring not just their own piece of work, but understanding what the organisational landscape looks like, they are particularly good at joining the dots and raising the right questions with the right colleagues and making sure that their project or program isn't addressing an issue that another project or program is looking at. And that's really key when looking at roadmap of activity taking place across the organisation. The most effective leadership group is one that is actively discussing the different pieces of work, making sure that they're not duplicating, and who are also discussing around the change capacity of an organisation. I did talk about this or blogged about this recently because it was a big deal in many organisations around capacity of the people to absorb change. And that also links through to mental health and well-being in an organisation. And it is important that those conversations come to the fore and that leaders are really across those conversations, initiating those conversations and leaning into those conversations, especially at this point in time and in an ongoing way. So a couple of things for your consideration. So if you're working with leaders, certainly make sure that you're empathetic towards their world. There is so much change happening in many, many places. Leaders have been through the pandemic as well, and they will have their own pressures. They are human beings after all. And it is worth making sure that the leader is clear on their role in a program so that messaging can come from all different areas, but important that they are clear about their role and the expectation and what the program team needs. Then also empowering them with the right information around risk, decision making, impacts of different decisions, ensuring that any issues are raised, escalated as appropriate, so that that leader can make decisions or guide the team on the best way forward. And sometimes that is quite a critical role that that leader plays. And that they are engaging their peer group. And by engaging their peer group, they're going to get the best outcome of the piece of work to ensure that everyone is on the same page in relation to all needs across the organisation, not just what this specific piece of work is going to be delivering. So all important things for leaders. And whether you're a project manager or change manager that a leader has employed or sought out to run the piece of work, the best approach is to ensure that the questions are asked of the leader, to check in with them where they're up to, their understanding of their role, rather than taking them through a theoretical, this is what your role is and this is what I need you to do. Many leaders do not have the time to be taken through step by step, and so they do appreciate practical things, practical tasks for them to do, and also the time required of leaders to effectively lead a program is also another aspect that does need to be considered. I do remember that in a particular organisation I was at, there were the number of hours that a leader needed to spend in steering committees and in different governance forums, as well as then going and communicating the change and essentially presenting on the program, was quite significant. So almost a day a week on a program. And that did mean that there was always points of tension and the inability to actually access the leader because that reality check hadn't been put on the table about the time requirement. And that can be quite contentious. And this comes then back to prioritization. How important is this piece of work to the leader and to the organization? And is it important enough that it gets prioritized and that capacity is created consciously? And these are the type of discussions really that do need to happen in organizations to ensure that the priorities are clear, that everyone's aligned, and that things go forward in a really effective fashion. Just some things to think about. I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. I've certainly enjoyed recording it. I do enjoy talking about leadership, but I do want to unpack it more. I just want to talk about and round out the change diamonds of program effectiveness. So we've got the 4 points covered now. And if you hadn't been able to catch the other prior episodes, I recommend that you do, because the design elements, the project and the change management elements are just as important as leadership. They all combine to create the best outcomes possible, that's for sure. I hope you come and visit us at myvirtualchangemanager.com. We have a lot of tools, resources, and articles there for you to be able to enjoy and upskill in the world of change. And I hope you have a wonderful day.